Yeah, I think the panelists and all the organizers are here now, so maybe we can get started. So yeah, welcome everyone to our second ISER Early Career Research Seminar Series. Today will be about leveraging your PhD for careers outside academia. So it's basically to show you maybe where your PhD can take you. So I'm Marguerite. I'm one of the organizers of this webinar alongside with Dr. Ming Lu, Dr. Daisy Xu, and also Tim Droweiler. And Tim is still walking, I can see, busy day. Yeah, we're really delighted to have such a wonderful panel today featuring Nilisha Fernando, the doctors Nilisha Fernando, Hannah Whitmore, and Julia Oswald, and NJ Su, to share a little bit of their experiences from their PhD, postdoc, and how they now transitioned into other careers outside of academia. And in some cases, even going back to academia. So we hear about this later. So there will be about, after we let our speakers quickly introduce themselves, about a 20-25 minute pre-recorded interviews where we have three of the panelists. We asked a couple of questions previously, and they will already give you a lot of insight and a lot of tips in maybe what to consider and what to think of in their chosen fields. And then we will go back and have a bit more questions, and we can ask, have open questions to all our speakers as well. So during this time in the interview, if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat. And, we can, even speakers are, if they are interested in, can answer right away, or then wait for the final panel discussion to answer these questions. So yeah, maybe I'm just going to start, and maybe Julia can start. Maybe if you have a minute or two, introduce yourself quickly, where you're from, what you do, where you got there, how you got there.
I just wanted to tell you not to start with me because it's gonna take forever now. So I did my
PhD. You have 1 or 2 minutes.
Okay.
Oh, by the way, talking about taking a minute, I have, for all the recorded interviews, there's an extended version, which is extended. So you can always go back, and we will upload them. Daisy, that's correct, huh? Like somewhere, maybe on a YouTube link. We can send out the links later, and you can watch the whole videos. There's a lot of extra information. Definitely go watch them. Okay, up to Julia.
All right. So I'm originally from Germany. I live now in Boston, Massachusetts. I did my PhD at University of Cambridge in Britain. I worked there on retinal development in zebrafish. Then did a postdoc at Scapin's Eye Research here in Boston, working on cell replacement, stem cell therapy approach, working on like 3D retinal organoids, and transitioned to industry about 2 years ago, barely. First worked in gene therapy at 2 different companies, and now I'm holding a title as Associate Director for Translational Biology in a new startup, which has some cell therapy background. So currently basically in a role that ties back to what I did in my postdoc at Scapin's.
Thank you. So who's going to go next? I'm just going to go along my slide. So it's Hannah next. Hi, Hannah.
Hi, I'm Hannah Whitmore. I did my PhD in England. I did my PhD in natural products and synthetic organic chemistry. And then I moved to Boston for my postdoc, and that postdoc was in cell biology, really, specifically in diabetic retinopathy, sort of what goes wrong in people's eyes, how can we stop that, how can we fix that? And then I transitioned out of academia to my current job, which is at a patent law firm, about 1.5 years ago now. And so I've been working on patent prosecution and a little bit of patent litigation since then.
So then it's Nilisha. Hi.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. So my name is Nilisha. I'm a medical writer at Envision Pharma Group. So how I got here was I did my PhD in Australia. So I'm Australian. I was working at the Australian National University for many years. I did my PhD and graduated with that in 2017. with a focus on kind of age-related macular degeneration and the immune system. I then did 2 postdocs. So I did, each postdoc was 3 years. The first one was at the ANU, also in the same group. And then I moved over to the NIH in Maryland in the US to work on Alzheimer's disease and also the immune system in that role. So after 6 years of postdocing, I decided, okay, I wanted to make a transition out of academia. So I was looking around at jobs that would be good, and I came across medical writing. And so that's why I'm a medical writer now. So
Awesome. Yeah, and last but not least, Anjay, you can introduce yourself quickly.
Hey everybody, my name is Anjay Su, and I did my PhD in Pittsburgh with Philip Ahren. He's famous for discovering a little molecule called interleukin beta, interleukin 1 beta. And you know, when I was doing my PhD, kind of the pie in the sky is always to become a professor and run your own laboratory. And you know, there's a short story about Christmas Day when I showed up at the laboratory at 8 a.m. and my benchmate was already there. An hour later, one of the senior students arrived, and then 2 hours later, Phil arrived into the laboratory. So we were working as usual. And after many kind of like observations about how harried Phil was, and this famous super smart guy was kind of begging for money, I was like, oh, there might not be a lot of ROI on being an academic researcher. And you know, I was looking for opportunities for careers outside of academics, and eventually I ended up starting, after I graduated, skipped postdoc, started up a series of analytical laboratories with a group of smart people, which we built into a multi-state organization in Pennsylvania, New Jersey, DC, New York, all of which, you know, we have about 1,000 employees today, and you know, it's a multi-million-dollar organization, and I serve as the chief science officer. So after that became relatively stable, you know, at the end of the day, what you want to do is you want to have something that kind of gets you up out of bed every morning, and gets you excited about going to work. And I looked back towards academics, and then so now I'm here in Denver, and I'm assistant professor. I also still do the chief science officer thing, but I'm less operational. And I'm at Denver doing whole eye transplantation research. So that's how I'm here today.
Awesome. Thanks so much for all of you coming. So I think we should just jump into the pre-recorded interviews. Yeah, if you have any questions, again, feel free to put them in the chat or have them later in our open session. So give me 1 second. Oh, I can't share yet, Daisy. Now? Here we go. Let me just give me 1 sec. When I start at the beginning. Oh yeah, so it's the video is like this, that always the question and the person who's answering will pop up first, and then you hear them answering it, so you kind of can follow maybe a bit more easily. Hang on, I forgot to share the sound as always. Here we go.
I think for the preparation aspect, for me, it's quite straightforward, since basically from PhD, I've been on the ocular background on neuroscience, right? I haven't really strayed from them. So pretty much my core knowledge in that field is still what I apply in my job. I know there's a lot of postdocs who, you know, did, I don't know, let's say migration and slime molds, right? I mean, there's so many things you can do in science. And in industry, a lot of them will go to, you know, one of the big fields, oncology, diabetes, I don't know, things like that. And the reason that works for most people is that industry is mostly interested in your skills, right? And when it comes to skills, if a recruiter looks at your CV, it's all about, well, I need somebody who can do flow cytometry, that has experience in imaging and has worked with this model system. If you can check those 3 points, the recruiter, who often doesn't have much of a scientific background, doesn't care that that was applied to something entirely different. And that's how most people then get hired out. Ultimately, their skill sheet is what sells them, not their publications, not necessarily what they've done in their field, but those things. Now, if you've been a young investigator who started their own lab and you transition at a higher level, then publications, other things might be a bit of a different story. But for most people who either leave right after PhD or postdoc, it's all about the skills. And that's if you're, for example, on the fence about like, oh, should I do a postdoc? Should I not? Most of the times, especially if you leave right after PhD, companies are willing to train you in your position. And that oftentimes means if you can fulfill certain skills for a job you're looking at, there is no need to do more postdoc because, oh, you might get that other paper out. Because the paper is that one thing they really don't care about. I can tell you, since I've left academia, nobody has asked me about my publication ever. Like, that's the core thing. The other thing, I guess, that really prepared me, and that's more in the postdoc times, my supervisor at the time, trying to get grants and other things, was really focused on networking and making sure that when you go to conferences, if you can, you do a poster, you do a presentation, you talk to people, you go and ask questions at other talks, and you try and engage. And I think that's been really crucial for me, because really going out there and talking to people is why I have the job that I have now. Because if I hadn't had that good connection with them, they wouldn't have come up at that next conference and been like, look, we have somebody who we might refer to you to talk to because we had a good relationship. And that's kind of how that works. And that's another thing to bring up, is really that networking kind of sets you up for later on. And not just going to the PIs. I think that's one thing I like to kind of share, is like, when you're at the conference, don't just talk to the PIs, because they're going to retire eventually, especially the ones that are really old already. But the people that are your age group, because some people are always like, oh, it's a waste of time. You just hang out with the people your age, with your friends, basically, and don't do anything. But by the time you're going to have an established career, they are also all in the age where they have an established career. So somebody you're going to be actively working with are those people. So don't discredit that, don't discount that, and kind of basically spread the contacts you have as far and wide as you can. I think that's what I would say for that. Yeah.
If you want to become a patent attorney, or if you want to work in patent law, you have to have a degree in STEM. So that's, any kind of science, engineering, technical kind of background. You have to really understand that science background, because you're going to be exposed to clients' inventions in areas that you do not know. So my background, like I said, is in chemistry, medicinal chemistry, cell biology, but I work on client projects and inventions across huge spectra, like all the way through to like AI and things that I'd never had any experience with before. So having that baseline scientific knowledge is super important. And having sort of an interest in law is obviously very important. There's no point going into a patent law job if you've got no interest in sort of the law side of it. But I'd say that specifically having the PhD and the postdoc prepared me by giving me a really great baseline in science across like quite a broad range of science, but also learning how to prioritize my projects, juggling things at the same time, writing papers, like that's really important, being able to write well. So I'd say, yeah, they definitely helped.
I do a lot of writing, so it's something which I really actually enjoyed during my time in academia. So that's something I definitely did love and wanted to pursue a bit more of. So I had heaps of writing experience during my PhD and postdocs. So that included my thesis writing, writing my own research papers, also being able to contribute to writing and editing for other people as well. So other people in the lab, either previous members who had left or people who didn't want to write up their work. I was actually contributing to that as a postdoc as well. I also wrote up grant applications. So grant applications are really helpful with being able to kind of work out what was really important to convey in research. And also I've prepared ethics applications for both animal work and also for human subjects. So I think that's kind of also really helpful. It's just being able to understand the different kinds of writing in an academic environment and seeing how that could be applied. I also developed skills. I had a very broad exposure of skills during my PhD and postdocs, which allowed me to think about how other types of skills like project management and also engaging with collaborators or clients could actually be also very useful for this kind of job. So basically, it's do you have the skills to lead projects, which most people doing a PhD or postdoc do have. It's just being able to actually say it in that way. And also engagement with collaborators as a potential way to say, oh, I can actually do these interactions with key clients and stakeholders. So I think that's something, just thinking about how you could take your academic skill set would be very valuable. I also took on other opportunities around the lab in both of my postdocs. So my time at NIH and my time at ANU, and also my time as a PhD student. I actually went above and beyond in the time that I had spare. And I ended up taking on a lot of administrative jobs around the lab, management, organizing mouse colonies, supervision, etc. And I think that all really helped to be able to build the skill set as well.
Academia is the least amount of income you'll ever make. Nobody cares about your publication. It might be quite the opposite. Some companies, especially startups, might still publish, but they are very strategic if they do. So in industry, time is always more important than money. So really, it's like, I mean, there's the saying, right? We can solve it by tossing money at it. And even if money is limited, like in some of the startups, they rather invest the money to have the data sooner, because as soon as they have the data, there's again the hope to get more money from it. Whereas in academia, it's always like, oh, it's going to take forever. We're going to have another little bit of this, a little bit of that. So they're really the time aspect is getting much more crucial.
I would say, so everything I do now is for, on behalf of, in the best interest of a client. So they are the most important person in every decision that is made. The science isn't yours. So when you're coming onto a project, you have to, if it's something you've never looked at before, you have to really get up to speed very quickly, and you have to be really curious and diligent about finding out what is actually important to know to help your client, because we all get sucked into black holes of reading papers and figuring things out, and being able to sort of prioritize, actually know what do I actually need to read in order to figure out how to best serve this client. That's a skill that you end up having to sort of learn on the job. So you're being more like logical in the approach rather than sort of, I feel like as researchers you can get quite emotionally attached to your work. So there's a much more like logical approach to it. And also just the amount of science that you see. So, as a postdoc, I was at Harvard Medical School. It is an enormous institution. There is so much research happening, but I was at Scapin's Eye Research Institute. So I saw my work, my colleagues' work, sort of institutional work, but you don't really ever see like the broader picture. Whereas in this kind of job, you see the breadth of science and the breadth of cool discoveries that you are seeing on it. It's fascinating. It's really interesting seeing everything that people are coming up with that nobody else is going to know about for like at least the next year. So I think that's really cool.
Yeah, so there's actually a couple of differences which I think are very easy to see in my role. Been here for 5 months now, so I kind of think, okay, well, there's definitely some key differences that I can notice. I guess the biggest one is that it's very deadline driven. So we're responsible for delivering projects on time and hold ourselves accountable to it. So I think in academia, you do set yourself certain deadlines, or you do have kind of these soft deadlines that you want to meet for yourself. But I think in this kind of being in industry, I think you definitely have to set these deadlines and meet them. So that's something which is definitely very important, and it's an important skill to learn during your PhD and postdocs if you can. And just like, again, practice holding yourself accountable, because I think that's something which is good. If you set yourself a deadline and say, okay, well, why didn't I meet this deadline? Or can I do something differently to meet this deadline next time? That's a really, really big part of the job. It's a very professional setting. So I think the other thing is, I think in academia, I always thought maybe, you speak it like an academic language, but I feel like in an industry setting, it's really, there's a lot of discussions around the business side of science. So I think being able to familiarize yourself with the language that is being used is very similar to kind of other big companies where they actually use, they use deliverables and they kind of talk in a different kind of language. So I think being able to understand that, and when you're doing your client interactions, being able to go into a meeting and understand how they like to communicate, I think is a really big thing. So that's something I definitely notice is different about academia versus industry jobs.
Stay dedicated to your science and kind of the the mindset and curiosity. Now, on the other hand, I would say don't become too trapped in your field. The higher up you get, especially in small companies, you're gonna have to wear more hats. So that means you need to be more open to other topics, other research, and you got to be able to engage people like that. The other thing, and I think try and share that a bit in the story as well, I think that's important, is to kind of understand and get a new perspective as like how the horizon kind of needs to shift over time as to what your goal is, really what the aim is of what you do. Because I felt like when I was a PhD and a postdoc, the goal was to cure the disease, right? It's always the goal in a sense, right? You're sitting there, you're doing something translational, but your idea of curing the disease means your experiment in the labs works and you think you're giving this compound and it made the phenotype look better. And if that would just happen, then you've cured the disease, right? That's the end of your horizon in a sense. And you're somewhat aware that things need to go beyond that. It's going to have a clinical trial at some point, but that might be the furthest you're thinking. Now, as I transitioned to industry, it very quickly became clear that you need to be aware of what the horizons ahead are in order to, change what you're doing right now. For example, me having background in cell therapy, a lot of people are like, oh, you need the cells by themselves, they're not doing so well. We might have to add some drugs to make them feel better, go through the process. Now, you can think about that, but then everybody in industry will tell you, well, the FDA is going to let you do maybe cells in one compound, but if you add another 10 that can work in your lab, but the FDA is not going to run a clinical trial that's set up like this, because it's either going to be prohibitively expensive or they're not regulatory wise like set up to deal with anything like that.
I guess if you're interested in that kind of job, taking the patent bar before you apply to the job, absolutely not necessary. Firms are very happy to take people on with no legal experience. Like I had some in that I had worked for a tech transfer office and I'd done a couple of placements with the patent firms, but the vast majority of people that come into the profession are just interested in it. They enjoy writing, they enjoy arguing, they have an interest in the law, but they don't necessarily know anything about it, and that's completely fine. The real thing is that you should be really curious about science. Like you should want to know things about other people's science. You should, that's the fun part of the job, is getting to see all of the cool stuff that people come up with. And if you're not curious about other people's stuff, if you're very focused on your own and your emotional connection to your work, then maybe this is not the right kind of job for you. But if you're curious, you've got great attention to detail, you can prioritize different projects and jump in on things to help out other people on different clients, that you've got no scientific background in that area at all, then yeah, I think this is probably a job that you should consider.
So I think as a medical writer, so that's what I'm doing at the moment, but in this medical affairs kind of role, I think you really need to have an interest in clinical research and in medical writing. So I think you need to really love writing, because we do a lot of that. But also, as I mentioned, doing some of the other things like project management, interactions with collaborators, clients, and clinicians, and wanting to make an impact that's in the company, I think is definitely going to be very useful. If you are interested in these things, this could be a good career path for you. The other thing as a medical writer specifically is that it would be really good if you like remote work. It's not always possible to be based somewhere with an office. And I think that's the biggest thing around medical writing, is that it's actually easy to find jobs because you can find them anywhere. But the problem is that you need to be okay with working remotely. So right now, the nearest office to me is in Sydney, which is about 3 hours away from where I am in Canberra, which is actually okay because I can make the trip up every now and then and just kind of say hi and interact with my team members and colleagues. But I think being able to actually have the flexibility around working from home is also really important.
So the one thing, and that might have been out there, I think, a bit between the lines, and that ties back to saying, you know, for me, academia kind of broke down once I had a kid and the pandemic came in. I would kind of challenge you to go to your daily structure and treat it as a 9 to 5. And I'm going to expand on that because I know when you first tell the academic you should treat it as a 9 to 5, you immediately go into the discussion of, you don't have enough commitment. This is not a 9 to 5. You need to give in more hours. You need to do more. And it's immediately taking something as a 9 to 5 as being perceived as, I don't know, the new quiet quitting or whatever you want to call it. But I would challenge you to see it really as something different. As your life progresses, right, most of us, we go through PhD, postdoc, we don't have a family, we don't have other things to take care of. I can tell you daycare is open from, 8 to 6 at the maximum. And once you have a child, those will be the hours you have available, if you're in academia or not. So you're going to have to learn to be very efficient within the time you have. So that's one thing. And the other thing is kind of treating it as a 9 to 5. I think for me comes really with the challenge to say, what do I really need to do? What's essential to do? And how can I streamline to kind of fit into the time scale? If it cannot be molded into a normal day schedule, it is not happening in most cases. And the other thing is, most of the time, and that's something I mentioned before, we always think our time is unlimited. And that's why a lot of times, oh, this didn't work quite well, I'm going to do it again. I do it a little different. And ultimately, the one study that we need to get done gets run 20 times. And that's really where that's why it doesn't fit into 9 to 5, because instead of doing it once, fully planned, we're doing it 20 times, just a little different, just a little thought over, and kind of getting out of this loop at treating kind of your time as the most invaluable resource that's out there. I think that's something important to learn. And with that comes learning to delegate, having others do things, and living with the outcome. If it's not robust enough to be fully planned and executed, and you then live with the result, you cannot proceed. I really also kind of next level learned that the hard way now, since my only on-site lab work is when I commute to San Diego, which is the other side of the country. So if I'm there for 5 days and I have to do an experiment, it's that one shot. You're not doing it twice. We're not paying for it 3 times to fly you out there and do this. So, the level of planning and execution kind of needs to be there to have it. And if the answer is no, then the answer is no. And I think that's something I also like about industry, is that when you've done everything to a certain margin of, standard that you want to do, and the answer is no, then we all understand that it is no, and not we will go back and you try and redo this until we can make the answer yes, because we really think that's what it should be.
I mean, even little things like doing the MoFo Harvard biotech sort of patent course, doing signing up for office hours. So sometimes just emailing somebody at a patent firm and saying, hey, do you just have half an hour? Like, I know you're super busy. Do you have half an hour to just have a quick chat about where I am, what I'm thinking about, potentially me moving into patent law? And we're very happy to do that. Like, MoFo are big on people signing up for office hours and just having like a half an hour chat with somebody to sort of see, why they think they might be interested, or just sort of like having a chat about what do you do in a day, like what is your normal well, no one has a normal average day, I think I've discovered in this job, but what is your sort of normal average day look like, and what kind of things do you work on, and what kind of things do you discuss at work. So I'd say even something simple like, yeah, sending an email asking about an office hour, I would highly recommend, because it just gives you that little personal insight, and it's networking as well, right? Then you've reached out to somebody in a firm, you've got a name, you've got a connection, they know who you are, they know that you're interested, they know that you've put in that little bit of effort that maybe somebody else hasn't done. So I think it's all about, yeah, a little bit of networking and a little bit of putting yourself out there and maybe being a little bit uncomfortable, but in a safe, good environment.
So I'd say there's a couple of things on my list which would be very, well, I guess, pretty important stuff that you can already do at various stages, even if you're a PhD student or if you're doing a postdoc. Picking up writing experience where possible, I think, is definitely number one on the list. Anything counts here. So, you know, write up a paper, volunteer to do some editing, you know, write up that grant application. If your lab is looking for a person to help with animal ethics applications, contribute to that. These things will all help you kind of build your skills in being able to know how a formal document is written up. And I think paper writing, I think, is really helpful for that. In kind of introductory roles to like medical writing, so as an associate medical writer, you'll usually be trained pretty well in this kind of thing. But it still helps to be able to show that you are capable of writing before you go into an interview. I would definitely encourage you to take on extra tasks around the lab. Although these may take time, if you have time and if time permits in your day, I definitely recommend being able to contribute to the wider lab or the wider organization. So don't just think about the research, but also think about what are the soft skills that you can learn. And this is leading into the next point about transferable skills. And I actually have a list here of transferable skills that I'm going to read out, which I'm not going to spend too much time on, but I wanted to say that this is useful for not only this kind of job, but any kind of job. So any employer will be looking for these skills. You don't have to have all of them, but you do need to know how to articulate your experiences and how they might be able to help. So from an academic point of view, these are the things that you could say. So communication, this could be presentations, writing, and we actually usually have pretty strong skills as academics in terms of communication. Problem solving and logical thinking. These we also develop basically from the time that we're doing our PhDs. We are analytical, we're creative, we're thinking about how to solve problems. And I think that's something that's also an easy sell for us. Teamwork. We always work with labs, we always work in collaborative environments. You are constantly collaborating with other labs. And if you are on any committees or if you're on any kind of other societies, these are also kind of teamwork settings. So I'd say sell those skills as well. That's definitely something which is very valuable. Self-motivation, being able to take the initiative and take on some of these extracurricular activities, as I mentioned, taking on those lab duties. Although they may be such a pain, it's definitely worth doing because you can show that you're part of a wider, you're contributing to the wider organization. The ability to work under pressure, I think, is a really big one, and being able to meet deadlines. We do this as part of our thesis writing. If you're doing any grant writing, you will also have this down, and definitely sell those skills. Managing competing deadlines. All of these things can be sold in terms of this skill. Work ethic, and this is something which is not to be, it's not to be trivialized at all, but I think creating a positive workplace and being a positive person and showing dedication to the role really can make a difference and can help you get over the line in an interview. Dependability, they want to know that your projects can be done on time. So example, again, your thesis or certain papers, set yourself those deadlines and adhere to them. Adaptability and autonomy is another one that we've definitely learned during the pandemic. And I think during the pandemic, we got put through the ringer with COVID and being able to work from home, having to change our style, having to change the interactions we had with our team. So definitely draw on this experience, because this is very helpful, that future employers know that, you know, you are autonomous and that you are actually able to be adaptable. Leadership. Can't stress how much this one is important, but look for opportunities to be on committees and leadership. So this is something which definitely helped in my career. I had quite a bit to do with ISER in committee roles and on the council. So I think this is something that was really helpful for me, and I definitely recommend you look out for those opportunities. Take the initiative. And finally, organization. I think that's something which being well organized can be something that is going to lead you a long way. There's something else on this list which is a little harder to kind of develop, and that's self-confidence. I'm still learning how to develop that, but I think that's also something which can come across in interviews if you are going out for that new role. Self-confidence can be a huge one. So come up with a story for all of these transferable skills. Have a think about how it actually might apply to your own experience, and be confident with that list. And then you will actually realize how you might be able to actually transfer your skills from academia to industry. This is often one of the things as academics we're very unsure about. So with medical writing, it also is very applicable that you can think about those skills and how you could actually apply those to a career as a medical writer.
It's awesome, and especially Nilisha, a really great summary of these transferable skills in the end. So I will hand it over now to Menglu, my colleague here on organizing seminar, and she will continue.
Yeah, great answers from the panel, and that really answers some question of us, and give options to the audience if you're considering a career outside of academia. So now NJ has already introduced himself at the beginning. So I have three questions for NJ. If you could share some of your experience with the audience of about your journey, how you get to where you are today.
Sure. There's a couple things that I want to bring up to you guys from the start, which is that you know, I was always, like I had intimated earlier on, I was always kind of looking for possibilities and kind of preparing myself for a career outside of academics. And I put it into the chat. So a few of the things that I did was, I took some coursework that could give opportunities to give me a flavor for what it was like on the business side. So I took regulatory processes, I took product development, all these things that, later on I needed to do once I became the chief science officer for my company. But and then I also sat on a lot of different committees, like advisory panels. And then by sitting on those panels in graduate school, I had different opportunities to build things from the ground up. So, hey, you have an idea about maybe doing a financial planning 101 kind of seminar for graduate students, because that's something that people might not know about. And then, I reached out through my network, through various, sometimes it was cold calling, but then you get like people to sponsor like your seminars, so you can give away like iPads and stuff like that, and you bring in like people from banks, and they can give a kind of overview of how to take care of your finances and stuff like that. And then everything bootstrapping from designing like posters to securing like a place for the seminar to be held, those kind of things, all the little kind of like little details for organizing kind of events. I think that's kind of important for things that like I did later on, and just opportunities to interact with people outside of just people who are maybe interested in your field. So really the question was, how did I get to where I am? You know, like I said, I was always kind of looking towards opportunities that might get me into business outside, or what would I do next after I finished my PhD. And actually, you know, one of the things was that I did go on a kind of like a hunt for some postdocs, and you know, I got the grail, right? Like I went to Harvard, and I talked to Larry Benowitz, and Larry Benowitz seemed interested, and then like I got some advice from some of my colleagues, and they're like, hey, Angie, you know, those Harvard postdocs can turn out to be 7-year affairs. And I was like, oh man, another 7 years of training. I don't know. But I think that like, you know, in industry, there's kind of a rule of thumb is industry is kind of always hiring good people. So if you can acquire like a good skill set, like my background's in molecular biology, so that's applicable to many, many different kind of scientific questions. You can bring that like toolkit with you, and you can interrogate osteosarcoma, eye disease, any kind of signal transduction stuff, drug delivery kind of stuff. You know, those things are portable. So I think that industry is always looking for good people. So develop yourself as much as possible so that you become attractive candidate for various different companies that might be hiring. So that harkens back to what one of the other panelists said earlier about having the skill set. Touch as much technology as you can. You know, if you can get on the flow, if you can get on the microscope, all these kind of things I did. But yeah, so I decided not to do the postdoc, and then I tried a bunch of different things. You know, there's in business, if there's a need, then there's a business opportunity, right? So you just got to keep your eyes open for it. You know, I thought of several different things. I thought of doing a nootropic company. I thought of kind of building a company that would use insects as an alternative protein source for nutrition. And then finally, I hit on this analytical laboratory thing, which you know, we do stuff where we do environmental testing for various companies. In the food and drug industry, we analyze cannabis for the state. We do like some path stuff. So you know, that's kind of how I got here. But you know, the big thing for me was that I could not have gotten into either the position I'm at now, which is at the medical school in Denver, without the PhD, and I probably couldn't have gotten into the industry without the PhD either, because that opened up a lot of doors, and there's a lot of deference to PhDs. I didn't value, I think, how much weight the PhD carries. And then once the business became fairly mature, you know, one day I tried to, you know, I went from like an empty room and an idea to having over 1,000 employees. And, you know, it used to be where I was like helping to build shelves and come up with the ISO accreditation to get our laboratory certified, or doing method development for LCMS or PCR for various targets, washing bathrooms, to the day where like I tried to hire somebody one time and I brought it across the partner meeting, and they're like, oh yeah, well, you need to go through HR to do that. And I couldn't just hire anybody anymore. I realized, okay, this thing doesn't really need me to be operational anymore, and it's mature, and I can let it go. And then I you know, really I felt okay about going back into academics, which was like a huge pay cut. So I'm not doing it for the money. And I feel good about it because, you know, I don't have the pressure of putting the food on the table by the science. And I can just go after the truth and try to really move the needle. That's kind of my journey and on how I got here.
Cool. Yeah, that's very practical suggestions for us to consider. Basically, you need a permit, which is PhD, and then you need a vision to always keep your eyes open for opportunities, and then you need the skill set that will take you further. So I'm going to open up like the floor for questions from the audience. If you guys have any questions to the panelists, you can feel free to unmute yourself or put it in the chat box. And also, please take a look at the chat box. We have some amazing answers there, and Nilisha shared her email and LinkedIn to contact her if you're interested in medical writing. If we don't have other questions, I have a follow-up questions for NJ. Like what advice would you give to someone in a PhD who want to pursue a similar career?
I would say that in the PhD, what you really need to develop is a sense of professionalism. I think that, you know, it's not like one is easier than the other. You really need there's no real substitute for the hard work. And so I think that really carrying a sense of professionalism and having a high standard of excellence for yourself, and trying to find value, like whatever it is you can do to bring value to a team, you know, whether it's washing bathrooms, right? I mean, or what people were saying before, like I helped with the mouse colony when I was a grad student. I didn't have to, I wasn't doing like that stuff. I was working in vitro, but I did that. Or anything that you can do to bring value, that shows initiative, and that's super important. And then just making sure that everything comes across professional and that you can be reliable, and then you can deliver on things. And also, I think that you don't want to overcommit, right? Because you need to be able to make certain benchmarks. And if you say that you can do this much and then you only get here, then that's a bad look for you in industry.
Yeah, got it.
If no one else has a question, I definitely have one. Because it hit really hard, Julia, when you mentioned this 9-to-5 attitude, like to not do everything 100 times and actually get efficient and plan it and stuff. So how would you recommend to bring this up if you maybe want to do this, but your PI may not 100% follow up with it? Like, how would you maybe approach that to get to this mindset and working way?
Yeah, I mean, that's a difficult topic, right? I think I would say if you're in the transition from the PhD to postdoc, right, I would be very careful when you look for a laboratory that you would do a postdoc if that's what you want to do. Kind of what culture you're going into, because often you can tell from the get-go what type of mindset might be around, right? Once you are in it, right, if you haven't seen the signs, or it's kind of, cultures can change as people change in the lab. I think one advice I would give along those lines is to, if you're committed with a lot of extra tasks, like, you're running the mouse colony, you're doing half of a lab associate position because the money might not be there to do certain things, I think I would try and appeal to the key goals for the PI, which in some regards are your key goals too, right? If you really want to get that publication, you want to get your dissertation ready, then you got to finish up certain projects, you got to do certain experiments, and it's kind of really engaging the timelines for getting certain milestones of those experiments done, and being really open about that. If you want to achieve certain things within 3 months, within 6 months, then you can't potentially do certain other tasks because it's just not going to be, humanly possible in a way to put it together. Because oftentimes we've mentioned before also is, right, in academia, you have those kind of goals you set yourself, but then a lot of other things come along, and then everybody's okay that even so we said it should take 6 months, it took ultimately 12 months, but to kind of rein it in and kind of be more focused on those discussions, I think is a kind of a path to, put that together and put it in. And I think another thing I wanted to bring up when we had, right, you have to put in the hard work. It's like a statement that in some ways I agree with it. And I mean, and I agree with the part of hard work being, being professional, being excellent, having a good level of planning and execution. But I would like to kind of separate it from any achievement or anything we get out of it. Any goal is only worthwhile if we felt a certain level of pain going there. Like, I'm kind of against that notion that it's like, something is not just valuable because you suffered on the path there, because I feel like, especially in academia, that notion has been taken to a certain masochistic extreme in certain places that I don't think it's always quite necessary. And yeah, as you go into life and you have other interests, you might build a family, do other things, right? It's like pain and suffering shouldn't be like the, underlying need for achievement. It's, yeah, there's things like, the joy and the motivation to do it should ultimately be the main driving force, and not just there needs to be pain to reach the goal.
So true. Yeah, and also maybe I can add another question if no one else is interested. But feel free
Everybody's so shy. Come on, I'm gonna like.
Yeah.
Go for it.
Oh, I thought someone was asking something, but I otherwise I will just yeah, definitely. I agree with Teresa. Like there's many things, and especially also in the extended interviews, I would really highly recommend it that they're there. And I'm in my 5th year of a postdoc, trying to, I'm doing the seminar for a reason, maybe. But yeah, I wish I heard some of these things earlier. that would have definitely helped. But I had one thing, and it's also more I think it's more in the extended version from Hannah, like, because you had this transition going back to a different country, but still working for a company that actually does patent law in the US, and like, how is that kind of navigating now in the kind of new world with, like, a lot more is online. I mean, now we have, look at our panel, like we have someone in Australia joining us today and in London, like that's amazing. So yeah, how would you how was your experience in this regard?
Yeah, it's certainly strange. I think anyone that started a new job or a PhD or a postdoc or whatever during COVID has definitely had a very different experience to people who started before COVID was a thing. For me, it's been a case of, everyone that I work with, the entire patent team is in the US. So everyone is either 5 hours to 8 hours behind me. So in some ways, I like that in the sense that I wake up to all the emails that have come in through the night, and I know exactly what I'm going to be doing that day, and so I can really effectively plan my day for the work that's come in for me. And in another sense, I dislike that because I then very rarely get to work in person with anyone. And things when you start a new job, you have very little questions that you just want to quickly run to someone's office and be like, hey, I've got this very small thing. It's going to take 3 seconds of your time, and I just need to ask you one thing. And I can do that on Teams, but when you've never met someone in person, it can be quite tricky to know, are you bothering them? Like, you always feel like you're bothering somebody when you send an email or a Teams message with something, you're just like bugging them in the middle of their day. Whereas I feel like if you're going in person, you sort of, a bit more about them, and you have that more like a more personal connection. So you feel less like you're annoying people. And I think that just took a while for me to sort of get over that, because everyone was lovely and no one felt like I was bothering them or being annoying or sort of bugging them unnecessarily. Like, all of my questions were valid questions that I needed answers to in order to do my job effectively. And so I think part of that was like, I think Nilisha said earlier, like getting self-confidence and sort of having that sort of belief in yourself that, you're not just being irritating and you do need this in order to do your job. So I would say it's got pluses and minuses, and sort of navigating that has been interesting, difficult, fun, annoying, all of the emotions. But it's still working out, and people are very flexible. Obviously, people are more used to it now, working remotely. So no one's had any major problems with it, I would say.
If I could just interject to follow up on what Hannah was saying, one of the things that I think is for people to keep in mind is that, you know, anything good that's being built is a team effort. And, you know, the earlier you can get into that mindset, especially going into industry, and I think one of our other panelists talked about delegation, you know, sending people emails, you know, this is a team effort. You know, you need to correspond and collaborate with other people in order to get things done. Whereas like in postdoc and PhD, like, you know, it's all about proving yourself and what can you do?
It's very insular, isn't it? It's a very insular thing, and you get really sucked into that sort of like, this is my thing that I need to do by myself. Yeah,
that's right. I'm the only one in the world that can do this. I'm super important, right? But I think it's very important to realize that, like, you know, even looking back into that 9 to 5 kind of thing, like maybe you're good at like super good at a few key things, right? And then you just, if you can offload some of your responsibilities, then you can do things way more effectively. Now, as an entrepreneur, you might have to wear many hats and do all those things because you don't have the capital, you know, all these kind of things. But that's another thing, like, you know, without the VCs, you don't have money to build this thing. So you have to humble yourself a little bit while carrying this bravado of, oh, I know what I'm doing, right? I'm very valuable. So you just have to just get more into a team mindset and try to build something as a team to meet that end goal.
Yeah, and I think that brings back kind of a point that's, I think overall, that's some advice I got when I initially transitioned. It's a big thing in industry and outside academia is communication, and that across, right? Being part of that team communicating. Basically what I was told was like, you shouldn't worry about that you have enough skills. You worry about giving a good presentation and having good talks with the team itself, because just because you can't do the job doesn't mean that they're gonna hire you. Like, you need to also fit in the team. They gotta know that you're gonna be open to interact with other people and you're gonna fit the kind of culture they have, because their main scare is that they can't talk to you, because that's the stereotype they're gonna have of any academic that has done, you know, 5 years of postdocs or more. So really you gotta convince them. And I think that goes back to when we talked about the skills you have, you got to learn to have the confidence to sell those skills, right? You got to go out and be able to tell people that you have those skills, because just sending your CV to a certain job posting might not get you to even be reviewed, because especially in some of the big companies, right, those piles of CVs are super long. So you probably got to, you know, have contacts or other things. So, you know, keeping your LinkedIn updated, or once you think about how do my skills transfer, kind of reaching out to somebody who has done the transition can be really helpful, because they can help you to kind of, how does your CV need to look like? How do you want to phrase certain things? And kind of also give you the idea that, no, you have not just learned about how that slime mold, coming back to that, like, works, but there's all those other skills you've brought up. And I felt like going through that process, and when I initially started having those interviews, like, I gained a lot of confidence from that, because, you know, the interaction you had with some people, just like trying to hear, you could feel that they saw much more value in you than you initially kind of maybe felt about yourself when you first did that transition, because you're like, oh my God, I might have just given up writing a K award and I'm not good enough to be that professor or do something else, right? You've just been hit several times, and now you might be doing that transition. You're like, well, what am I worth? And they're like, oh my God, this is somebody who's done this precise thing I'm looking for 4 years. It's the best thing I've ever come across, right? So the perspective is very different there, and you should keep that in mind.
Great. Now we have a question from the chat by Christopher. So just keep in mind, we can still stay here for a few minutes since we were a little bit behind when we start, but feel free to drop off if you're if you need to go somewhere. So the question is more like to all the panelists. Do you think it's better to present yourself as having a broad experimental skill set when meeting with recruiters in biotech, or to focus more on just primary techniques that would be valuable to the company?
I'll just quickly jump in here. I mean, obviously, although I'm not working at an experimental lab bench at the moment, I think generally it would be good to focus in on the techniques that are going to be valuable to the company. So it's good to say, okay, I've got a broad skill set. As a general kind of, I can actually technically solve problems. I can master a lot of different things if I need to. I can learn quickly, but really focusing in on the techniques which are important to the company. If it's a neuroscience company, talk about behavioral testing, talk about any molecular biology that's important. It just really depends on kind of which company you're applying for. There's no point talking about behavioral work if you're going to be working for like in vitro cell lines or something. So I would say that would probably, bring it to the forefront in terms of what you would highlight. But it's good to say, oh, I've been able to master difficult techniques. If you have been able to do that, and if you have troubleshooted like a lot of difficult techniques, or if you've optimized them in the lab, definitely talk about that. That's something that's really important. Similarly, if you're going out of kind of the bench, focus on those soft skill techniques, so presentations, writing, etc.
I mean, I would say, right, like you don't just want to like target for that company. And that's, I think, another advice when you do that CV, right? You don't want to generate just one CV. You want to generate different, slightly altered versions for every application you put in, because they're going to be looking for the slightly different things. And especially if you go through the online process, you want to go as far as literally copying the terms they use for a certain methodology if you have done it, because that's literally how they're going to, computer search out those terms again. So just because you did in vitro biology, you might have a paragraph that in neat short sentences kind of outlines everything they're asking for, but since you're not using the same words, you're not going to be the first person who pops up in their, computer-driven search. So kind of really optimizing on that level is okay. And otherwise, I think for me, for most recruiters, when they reach out to me, I would have like a half-an-hour screening call with them. So mostly they give you a chance to introduce yourself broadly, and then they will be asking you questions more focused on the skills that they are looking for. And really, you can think about they're sitting there with the cross-check list, and the more crosses they can make on their list, the more applicable to the position you are. And I think that's what they're kind of heading, what they are looking for. So I wouldn't waste too much time in like the broad sense there.
Cool.
But also, I think that's one thing to say. Not all recruiters are bad. That's another thing I heard at the beginning. It's like, stay away from them. Some waste your time. I can tell you that once you are on the list for some of those that are looking for specific company jobs, I would stay away from those that look for contracting positions. That's something that you might really consider staying away, because they often don't come with any benefits and you're not a real employee of those companies. But for the others, if you have good interactions with them, add them on LinkedIn, stay connected. They will send you positions from time to time just because they continue to look, and you might find another opportunity through them, and you didn't even have to do any legwork yourself. Like sometimes you can look for a new job before it's you've been laid off or anything other detrimental happened. Like progress is always an option, even unprompted in a sense.
Just to briefly add to that. Oh, sorry, go for it, Andrew.
Well, I was just gonna just agree with what was presented from the other side. As management, engaging recruiters, we give them criteria, and those are the things that they pass on and are trying to check off on the interviews for recruiting candidates. So broad skills like, I have intellectual curiosity, or I'm good at like figuring out problems, that doesn't translate well into getting you further along in the interview process.
I was just going to
But
quickly
for being
say,
an entrepreneur, it's good.
just gonna quickly say that, like, don't be offended if people don't get back to you as well. Like, I think sometimes I've put in an application for something and they've taken literally like months to get back to me, and even just like say, oh, we're interested. And by that stage, I'm like, oh, they're not interested. Like, I put in that application a long time ago, but actually those ended up being offered some of those jobs. So yeah, I think you just got to kind of persist and maybe even apply twice. Sometimes also recruiters will they'll reach out to you, they'll organize a call, but you won't hear back from them. And that's also completely normal. It doesn't mean that you've necessarily failed or something like that, but it just means that maybe you don't have the right visa, or maybe you don't have, maybe you're not as, I don't know, maybe you're not what they're looking for, but it doesn't mean that it's a bad kind of reflection on you as a person, or, you know, that you don't have the right skill set. Often you do, it's just that for some reason or another, they've just gone in a different direction. So yeah, just keep that in mind and just don't give up.
Yeah, I agree with not taking it personally, because especially for jobs in America, oftentimes it is the visa that is the problem. So yeah, I agree with not taking it personally. But also, again, something I mentioned earlier is the personal touch, sort of getting in contact with people at the firm and sort of having a direct line into that sort of aspect of the job. So I know that when I applied for my current job, I did an office hour with somebody who is now a colleague of mine, and they were asked about what I chatted to them about in that office hour, and sort of how I came across when I didn't feel like I was under the pressure of an interview. So those sort of things, like those sort of personal sort of connections, and sort of the sort of pre-interview, pre even applying for the job stage, I would say actually is still helpful in sort of getting your foot in the door, so to speak.
Cool. Yeah, we got great answers. We just have time for one last question to all the panelists, to give one quick statement about what you wish that you knew before you change jobs. Because since NJ is like a reverse job changing, so you have a different question, which is I actually want to ask, for someone decided to stay in academia, so what from like the industrial job that you can bring to the academia job as lab management, sort of?
Yeah, I mentioned this in the chat. You know, it's maybe the culture in the lab here in Colorado. I've brought a lot of kind of industrial kind of standards where, you know, I set deliverables and milestones, and I make sure that like there's something that's kind of that's been executed. Maybe you don't get the result that you want, but there's something that's been executed in to try and move towards the milestone that you're trying to achieve. I would also just say that, like, you know, one of the big differences is that, you know, the reason why I went back is because in industry, what you'll find, I think, and the other panelists may have similar experiences, is that, you know, there's maybe less creative freedom within industry, because you have to kind of humble yourself to what actually will make money at the end of the day. And, you know, so when starting up this company, I had dreams of like creating an R&D division for the company, and doing all kinds of cool experiments and method development and stuff like that, and generating new techniques. But that all kind of went by the wayside, and it's all sort of like, well, let's do what our mission statement is and do what we do to make money. And then as soon as we become more capitalized, we'll have more room to do these other things. Whereas in academics, you know, if you can dream it and you can get funded for it, you know, you have 100% creative freedom. So yeah, that's, and so I would say that, yeah, just you might not, so think hard about what gets you up in the morning every day. Do you want to go and execute your vision, or do you want to just do science and be happy that you're doing science in a more broad sense, and be touching science versus doing your own science?
Cool. Other panelists?
I'll go next. I think what I wish that I knew was that it is okay to try something outside of academia. I actually had a pretty strong academic CV, so I thought for a long time that I had to do it and that it was kind of the main career pathway that I'd been kind of taught. But actually, I realized upon moving to the US that there's so many other jobs out there. And this is something which I think the US do very well at, saying, okay, well, a lot of people go to academia, a lot of people actually go to industry as well. It's maybe not as common in other countries, but you can actually go and try something different. And if you don't like it, you can move around. So that's something which, you know, I was a bit afraid to do for a while. But after making the move, I'm really happy with it. So yeah, so just feel free to try something. Just try it and see how you go.
Yeah, I think I'm on a similar line. It's just like, you know, realizing what opportunities are out there, and that I think, I mean, if you go to the extended interview, you hear about that on my end, but my biggest fear really leaving academia was to leave a kind of base sense of security of like, you know, it's not going to be great, but it's going to continue in some secured way and keep going. And so the first job I took, we were laid off after like barely 5 months because financial decisions, they shut down all of research. And I had so many new other opportunities afterwards that I didn't even think of leaving. But, you know, just the fear of making that first step really like initially held me back for so long, which now it's like, just like kind of realizing what different paths many people take. And I think if I can give one more tip on that, if you go to your next conference and you see people that, you know, work for like a scientific journal or some company and they're sitting at their booth, nobody's talking with them, you know, they're just people, they're just as bored as you might be right now trying to think what to do because you have a break between a session. Just go talk to them. And if it's not about their product, just how they came to where they're at now. And I think it's going to give you a great perspective that, you know, the path is not linear. There's a lot of different things out there and people might have done a lot of different jobs on their way, and, you know, all, you know, just explore the options. And with that, you know, make contacts and reach out.
I think maybe mine is slightly different to other people's in that I wanted to do patent law, and my sort of off track sideways step was doing the postdoc. So I originally was going to go straight into patent law straight after doing my PhD. I had a job offer in England that I was fairly committed to, but then my PhD supervisor talked me into doing a postdoc and said that I should apply. So I applied to Johns Hopkins and Harvard, and chose Harvard because wouldn't need a car. It was basically the reason I didn't want to have to drive in America. So it was all very yes, it was that was sort of my little sideways step off of what I planned to do. And that was because I'd done a PhD in chemistry, and suddenly I was going to a cell biology lab, you know, knowing A-level biology, which is very different, and honestly turned up thinking that Western blots were things that people did in the 1950s and they did not exist anymore, and was very quickly proven wrong about all of that. So that was my sideways step, not actually going into patent law, which is something that I actually had wanted to do for quite a long time.
Great.
Thank you.
Daisy, do you want to?
Yeah, I'll close this webinar. That was fantastic. Thank you for sharing all your insights. We want to thank all the attendees today for coming to the ISER ECR seminar, and of course a big thank you to our wonderful panelists, doctors Hannah Whitmore, Nilisha Fernando, Julie Oswald, and Anjay Su for sharing those valuable insights about their career journeys and pursuing those careers outside academia or transitioning back to academia. And feel free to reach out to them on LinkedIn and follow up with any other questions about navigating your career transitions. Thank you to the amazing ISER ECR Webinar Planning Committee team, Meng Lu Yang, Marguerite Karg, Tim Dorwiller for their hard work in putting this webinar together. We'll be sharing the recording and the extended interviews on our ISER Young Investigator YouTube channel, which is in the chat. For those attending ARVO next week, we actually have an ISER ECR meet and greet event on Sunday. 2 p.m. So stay tuned for that email because food and beverages will be provided. And thank you again for coming and hope to see you soon. So have a great
Thank you so
evening,
much.
everyone.
Bye.
Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. If you're a good analytical chemist, come get at me.
Hiring
We're
right
always
now.
hiring.
Now hiring.
Now hiring.